you for joining us for this edition in Conversation. Can you start by telling me about your upbringing?
I grew up in Cashel, Tipperary.
Oh, okay. I'm from Clonmel.
I know. Yeah, and just very rural, very, nobody in my family or nobody that anybody in my family knew worked in media or television or, God forbid, film or even theatre. I remember being brought to a newspaper printing press when I was a kid by my dad. That was the closest I ever got to mass media. And so it was just completely out of character. So
where did it come from then?
Well, God only knows. One of those is like a curse.
Or when did it occur to you something you wanted to do?
It was never on the radar as anything. There was no career in film when I was a kid or when I was a teenager. It just didn't exist. There wasn't an Irish Film Board. I suppose you could get a job in RTE, but that would never have even occurred to me. The idea of getting a job in RTE. So I loved films. I watched a lot of films. I ended up going to art school. The art school I went to, somewhere along the line when they had money in the 70s, they'd invested in a 16mm camera and a Steenbeck editing bench and a TV studio. So they had all this gear lying around and they had no idea what to do with it. So they basically started a film course, despite the fact that they had no idea how to teach film. And I just signed up for the film course and that was it.
Okay. So from there, TG Carr, was that your first job?
Oh my God, that's a huge jump. That's about
no.
That's several years. No, I mean, no. I made a short film that was my student graduation film was the first short film that RTE screened, first ever student film RTE had ever screened.
Wow.
They bought it for £1,000 at the time, which was I think they bought it for £2,000, and it had cost £1,000 to make. So I made 100% profit on my first film, and that was it. Then I mean, I was gone. That was the end. So made a few short films, and then and starved and had no idea what to do, and I made a short film for the BBC. I made a short for TG Carr, but there was no kind of industry at that point. And then finally, the Irish Film Board was reinstated.
Okay. So then TG Carr, was it?
Yeah, I ended up doing some bits and pieces for TG Carr. Yeah, it was my first paid job. I think first time I ever earned a living for directing.
Okay.
Children's telly for TG Carr.
So was it just a case of, because you eventually ended up in Ballycasangel Angel?
Eventually.
How long between you making your first short and?
10 years. Yeah, about 10 years. There wasn't really an industry, and then I made a short film that was written by Donald Clark, and it was a very successful short. It was sold to Canal Plus before it was even finished. It was ridiculous. Somebody showed them a rough cut and they bought it, and that kind of got me an agent, and then the agent said, "Oh well, I don't expect you to get this, but I'll send you along for an interview for Ballycasangel Angels for practice. See what you think." And then I got the job, and then suddenly I was directing, a successful TV drama with a massive crew, and directing Colin Farrell, although he wasn't Colin Farrell then.
Yeah,
he was just Colin.
And was that daunting, that whole experience, or was it exciting?
I think it was too stupid to be daunted. Okay. I just kind of thought, this would be fine, and it was fun. I had a great time.
There was, and I mean, at the time, like Ballycasangel Angel, it was a bit like Glenroe had been. It was a kind of a permanent fixture in the television.
They had a much bigger budget than Glenroe, I'll tell you. They had a standing set out in Ardmore all the time, and they had shot on film. They shot on Super 16, and it was very, very well funded. It was very successful all over the world, and it was kind of closer to, at the time, what Game of Thrones is now in terms of the impact it had on the industry here.
Yeah.
It was huge. I mean, everybody worked for people put their kids through college on Ballycasangel.
Okay, and did that open more doors for you then? Because you went to the Royal and you.
Yeah. I did other stuff then. I did TV and all that in England and all that. But genuinely, I never really wanted to do television as a director. It was never of interest, because TV directing then was kind of like, you got to be aware, this was the 90s when the independent film sector was all over the world, was booming, and you had Doug Liman and Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh and people making films that cost no money and getting huge attention, and that was what I was focused on, and trying to do that in Ireland, trying to make low budget genre movies, comedy, thriller, horror, whatever, spent most of my time in the 90s trying to get those films made, but there was no appetite for funding them here. It was very much, at the time, film funding in Ireland was all about trying to make, I wouldn't even call them art films, it was just trying to make very introspective films about Ireland and Irish heritage and Irish, what is Ireland all about and all that. Films that never travelled outside of Ireland. And at the same time, you watch the international landscape at the time, and movies from Britain and France and all over were booming, but we had no breakout films from Ireland. So I got very frustrated with that, and I just left Ireland and went to work in TV in England.
Right, okay. And then what would you consider, in terms of the industry here, was a breakout film? When did that change? Or
probably the last 4 or 5 years, but the film industry worldwide is more or less dead now. There's no that middle ground film that kind of existed in the 90s where you could make a Reservoir Dogs, or you could make a Sex, Lies and Videotape, and people actually went to the cinema and paid to see them. That doesn't happen anymore. You don't get, mid-range films now, they get seen by far fewer people than they would have done then. So I think my feeling is with the Irish film industry, we kind of missed the boat on that, and now it's kind of going to be, it may well be television that kind of saves things and so on, because it's very hard to know how worldwide how those kind of small budget films or films that aren't from Hollywood are going to fare anymore.
Okay. So going then to England, and you worked on Casualty and The Royal and
every kind of middle of the evening TV show there was.
But what was the experience of directing in that sphere like? Was they're well funded.
It's grand. It's like it's a nice way to learn how to use. I mean, I learned everything I know about, or most things I know about, working with big crews there. Because before that, when I was doing shorts and all that, you never really had. Everybody's working for free, so it was all kind of. You get on with the best you can, but it's hard. Once you're working with a crew of 120 people, you learn how to, make the best of that, how to plan and how to deliver on what you've planned and all that. It was fun. It was logistically really interesting, but not creatively interesting.
Okay. And how long would you have to film each episode of an hour-long episode?
TV is usually about an hour. An hour-long episode is 2 weeks.
Okay.
In general, I think that's the rule of thumb across most television.
So you were working in England and you had left purposefully. What brought you back?
Well, that's tricky because basically I stopped directing and I decided I wanted to start developing my own stuff, because I wanted to start making stuff that actually I kind of owned, what they now call the IP and the intellectual property. It's become a buzzword, but at the time all I knew about producing was I worked with a bunch of different producers and I didn't think any of them were all that shit hot, and I thought I could probably do this. But the only thing I knew about it was I read Robert Evans' book, The Kid Stays in the Picture, which tells the story of how he made some of the biggest hits in Hollywood, from Godfather, Love Story and all that. And, kind of all I learned from that was you need to own copyright, you need to own material, you need to own a property that you think has potentially will make money, and then you use that and you leverage that into actually having some control and some power. So I found something that I believed in, which was it was a completely left field thing. I didn't have any money. I couldn't buy the rights to a bestseller before it came out. But there was a blog on the internet called Belle de Jour by a woman who claimed to be a prostitute, living a double life and kind of not telling anybody what she was doing. And she was writing this thing. It was winning awards, best blog. But blogs were kind of what Twitter is now. Blogs were kind of this thing that were kind of, they were people were writing them, and everybody had their own, but they weren't kind of taken seriously or seen as being anything. There wasn't any idea that you could monetize this. So I was kind of looked upon as being a bit crazy when I was going around saying I want to make a TV show out of this blog. But we managed to. I hooked up with a very good Irish producer in London called Avril McCrory, and. Can we close this door below? And together we put together a partnership with Tiger Aspect, and the blog became a TV show called Secret Diary of a Call Girl, and it took 4 years for this to happen, and during that time I wasn't earning any money, so I eventually ran out of money and I left London and came back to Dublin. And then about 6 months after I came back, just as we'd been turned down by everybody on Secret Diary, and then Billie Piper got interested and said she'd play the lead, and then suddenly it happened. Suddenly it was a hit international, 4 seasons of it, selling to every country in the world, big TV show.
And how did it end up on Billie Piper's desk? How does that happen?
it's all about connections and agencies and all that. I mean, basically, a large international agency had partnered up on this show, and they happened to have Billy Piper on their books, and then they brought her the property. It's the way everything happened. I mean, you know, it's very hard to get people's attention if you're just nobody. You kind of need. So, you know, and then part of the downside is you give parts of it away, because you end up giving away, in order to get that influence, you give away chunks. And the part of the chunk that was given away in order to get this credit on was my producer role. So I ended up with a financial stake in the show, but not a producer role, which is what I initially, my whole 4 years of work had been to get my first time producer credit on a TV show. Okay. So I didn't get that. So it was kind of, it was a bitter pill.
So what did you get then?
Got a shitload of money for a very short time. Okay. For about 4 years when the show was running, I was earning money, quite a decent amount of money, all of which ended up getting turned into starting Screenworks, which is the company that I run.
With Rob Cawley?
Yeah.
So where did you and Rob meet?
During my years of, you know, penury and trying to keep body and soul together while I was trying to become a producer, I was working in RTE Cork doing factual programs down there for about 6 or 8 months, and Rob's another staff member down there. He wasn't really called a producer or anything. They didn't really have proper job titles. He was kind of like an all-purpose staff member whose job was basically making programs that would work. So you kind of, everything from being responsible for buying in the right camera to organising, you know, organising shoots, to crewing, to researching, historical research. He was doing everything, and I was kind of really impressed by this, because I'd grown up in that kind of tradition of the film business where you do one thing, you know, and I'd never even dabbled in writing. I was really pretty much a director. I'd written some, but mostly I was just a director. And suddenly I'm kind of seeing the possibilities. And when you start doing, I mean, we were shooting our own rostering camera, we were doing our own editing, we were pretty much doing everything. And I realised how much fun that was. We were working with people who were like-minded. So myself and Rob made a few programs together, and we got on really well, but it was kind of like, you know, his background was comedy and factual, and my background was drama, and that's where I saw myself going back to. So it didn't seem like there was going to be any further thing. But then we kind of just kept talking about ideas and stuff, and ended up starting a company together. Okay.
So from that partnership and the money that came from Secret Call Girl, is that when you could start doing the films that you had wanted to do?
Yeah, because finally I was in a position up till that time, up till this was 2007, I suppose. From all the years I've been working in the industry, which is basically the previous 15 or 16 years, constantly the stopping point always was, you'd have an idea, you'd go to somebody who had money, whether it was RTE or the film board or whatever, and they would either say a flat no, or they'd give you a tiny amount of development money which would just keep you alive until they finally said no. And every idea I'd ever had had always stopped dead at that point. So finally I had money to do my own stuff and develop my own ideas, so I started to work on the John Healy documentary Barbaric Genius, first of all with the illusion that I was going to get RTE involved or whatever, and that didn't happen until the very end of the project, but finally they did come in, but only after 5 years, and but bits and pieces of money came in, but I was able to keep filming, because I had some money to spend. For the first time in my life, I could, if I wanted to fly to London and do some filming, I couldn't, and I could pay crew, I paid the crew out of my own pocket, I paid for everything, and ended up investing. I think I probably in the end put in an equal amount of budget into that film as the film board did. It was a big lot of money. So that and Extremely Dangerous, which is my second feature documentary, were largely bankrolled and made possible by the fact that I didn't have to work. I could just do what I wanted to do for the first time in my life, which is an interesting and salutary lesson, which leads me to when people in the film business say to me, or young people getting into film say to me, what do I need? What's the most important thing I can have to get by in this business? And I say, rich parents. It's almost impossible to get by if you don't have some kind of way to keep yourself going while you're trying to make your films, because nobody's going to bankroll you until you actually prove yourself, and by that stage it's too late.
Because you say you weren't working, but you were working.
Yeah, I was working.
You were working
for nothing.
Yeah,
which is different.
Okay, so Barbaric Genius.
Yeah, well, the backstory. Well, when I was coming out of college, it was the late '80s, and Ireland. There was nothing cool about Ireland. Ireland was this place that basically. The cool stuff was happening in the north of Ireland. All the attention of the world was focused on the north. The music, the films, things that were interesting were happening there. Dublin was dead. One thing that was interesting was the London Irish thing was starting to happen. You had the Pogues coming out, who incidentally at the time nobody on Irish radio would play. I think I might have been responsible for the first playing of the Pogues on Irish radio. I asked Dave Fanning to play one of their songs when he came out to the college I was in, and he played one. But they were not on the radar. They were considered to be, I think, in the same way as Father Ted was considered to be when it came out, a piss take of the Irish by the English. So anyway, I loved the Pogues. I loved John Healy's book, The Grass Arena, which was similar. It was from that same world. John was second generation Irish. His parents had been from the west of Ireland. They'd moved to England before World War II, and he had been born there in the early 40s. And because his dad didn't go to war, didn't feel he should, was Irish. He spent his childhood being battered in school, and then he'd go home and be battered by his father. And he had this awful upbringing, but he was an intensely intelligent kid who grew up to be an intelligent man, but also had a weakness for alcohol. And the book was the story of how he spent years on the street as a wino and a mugger and a thief until he discovered the game of chess and gave up drinking and tried to go on the chess circuit, but then discovered that chess didn't satisfy him either, so he tried to set out to find new horizons for himself. So I'd been fascinated by this book for many years and why had John Healy disappeared completely off the scene. And I managed to track him down and thought, this is a story that's going to be interesting to people here. Found it was a very hard sell to the people in charge of money in Ireland because they felt he was English. They really felt he's got an English accent, it's an English story. The notion of the diaspora hadn't really percolated down. The person who was decisive in getting that film made was Alan Marr, who was in charge of documentaries at the Irish Film Board, and who could see that there was a story there, and who was had enough of a vision to just stump up the few quid it took to get started. Because as I say, I did end up spending a lot of my own money on it, but in order to get people to feel it was a real film, you need somebody behind you initially. And when the film board came in and put money in, that made it feel real, and then people would start to work, and we started filming, and I thought I would make it quite quickly and maybe have it on RTE within a year, and of course it took 5 years of my life and nearly killed me in the process before it was finished.
And why did it take so much longer than you expected?
First of all, because we kept running out of money and people kept dropping out. I mean, first of all, I had been working with quite early on, because once the film board money came in, it was possible to start talking to co-producers in the UK, and it's clearly a very UK friendly story. It takes place mostly in London and the literary scene there and the world of London crime and all that. So we got a very, very, very well known co-producer, multiple Oscar winner and all that kind of stuff on board, who then had a different creative vision for how the project was going to go, and who dropped out. And then when they dropped out, that also took the film board's confidence from the project, and there was a period of about 2 years where there was nobody putting money into it except me, and I just kept filming and didn't stop until finally there was enough to do a cut, which I was able to present to the film board, and they said, okay, we'll give you a small amount more money so you can finish the film. So I finally, after 5 years, managed to, but partly there was a creative thing, because it was, as you know if you've seen the film, John is a very, very difficult man to get to open up, and over a long period of time I got to know very well off camera as being a very charming, funny, warm, open person, but as soon as the camera went on, he clammed up and he became tense, and he became, the tension was radiating off him, and I could see, it was clear from the rushes that wasn't going to work. No audience was going to sit through this story watching this man who clearly was hiding something, and it took me years to get to the point where I had enough connection with him where I could get him to loosen up on camera and get the material from him that I needed to make the audience understand what kind of a man he was. So between the money and the creative stuff, it was a very, very trying 4 or 5 years.
And was it in the middle of this then that you started Extremely Dangerous?
Yes.
So tell me about that and how that came about.
Well, just after the film board dropped out, which was a huge blow, that's when I didn't have any white hair until that happened, and then literally in about a week I had a lot of white hair on my head. I was sitting in the office in the middle of the night, with nothing, just trying to think of something, a way out of this awful impasse, because I'd half shot this film, I'd invested a lot of my own money in it, and we couldn't finish it. And I got an email from the USA, and it was from Jerry McGill's fiance, Joyce. Jerry was a guy who I'd been keeping tabs on because he turned up out of the blue about a year previously. I had been in America some years before that trying to track him down for a documentary. I was trying to get off the ground in Memphis, Tennessee, and couldn't find him because he was in jail in Florida. He eventually got out of jail, picked up that I'd been looking for him and got in touch, and we were talking, and it was kind of an interesting thing because he was this kind of crazy outlaw guy who'd had a huge cult in the 70s built around, not around his music so much as his persona. And I got the email just at the point at which Barbaric Genius had kind of hit a wall. I got an email from Jerry's partner saying he has cancer. He's traveling to Memphis next week to make a record because he wants to get back in the music business, and will you come and film it? And this is a guy, bear in mind, his only previous recording had been released in 1959. This was 2009. So it's 50 years later, and this guy was dying of cancer, and he was trying to follow up his original record, which wasn't a hit, and save his life by making a record. So I instantly just thought, okay, this is a story, there's something here. And all my Memphis connections and friends, people I knew, thought I was insane. Again, this is a constant thread in my career. People were saying, this is crazy, we're coming all the way from Ireland for this, you never met this guy, what's going to happen, and we don't know what he's like and all that. So I had enough money in the bank where I just said, fuck it, I'm going to get a flight, I'll get a return flight, see what happens, bring a camera. And that was the start of this journey that ended up being very extremely dangerous, because Jerry was an extraordinary subject for a documentary, and he continued to be an extraordinary subject through the 3 months that I was able to stick filming with him, because this was the opposite of the John Healy experience. This was a film that was started intending to be quite a long journey and ended up being a very short journey because it was over when it was over. At the point at which I thought I'm going to get killed if I stick around with this guy much longer. So
he was that difficult, he was that volatile, is that?
He was just dangerous. He was just somebody who... Jerry, God rest his soul, died last year in a hospital peacefully, but throughout his life he was always involved with people who came to bad ends, and he was the kind of person, you might have come across them in your life. There are people in the world who get into all kinds of trouble and they always get out scot-free, but everybody around them gets into trouble. Jerry was that, and I was sure that one of these days, if I travelled around with him long enough, he was driving in a car stuffed to the gunnels with knives, guns, drugs, and he was a 3-time felon, which meant he should have had none of those things. And if we got stopped by the cops, I knew I was going to be the one who ended up in jail, not him, because that's the way things worked. So it was interesting. We got there eventually. We got to the end of the point where where I said, I can't film this anymore. I can't go any further on this journey with Jerry. And then we started with the funding of the film board. I started trying to put it together, but actually that's jumping ahead, because I didn't start editing that until after Barbaric Genius had been finished, and it was the film board's faith in when they saw the finished product that was Barbaric Genius and felt it was, it had demonstrated ability, then they finally got involved in funding Very Extremely Dangerous as well. So I more or less shot the entire film on my own money before we started the edit.
Right, okay. So filming Extremely Dangerous didn't go as you anticipated. Were you, and maybe it wasn't the film you anticipated you were going to make, were you happy with the film you made?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Geez. No, but the idea was, I went into it trying to make a feel-good, redemptive film. I don't know if you've seen Anvil, the story of Anvil, a documentary about a couple of washed up rock and rollers who kind of finally in their 50s make it big, or if you've seen the movie Jeff Bridges' Crazy Heart, yeah. I kind of thought of it as being a cross between those two films. It was going to be a redemptive film about this guy who'd had a difficult life, who'd been a criminal, who'd been in and out of jail, and now he was dying, and with the love of a good woman and music he was going to redeem himself. But what we ended up with was this grueling story of a man who, no matter how many chances he got, he would always take the wrong path. He would always go down the road of crime and criminality and bad behaviour, because that's what, even at the age of 80, that was still what was easiest for him.
And did he see the film?
Yes.
And what did he think of it?
Well, that was an interesting one, because it was quite a while had elapsed between filming, and he had a lot of illness. He'd been through cancer. He'd been through a lot of therapy. I'm not sure if he had chemotherapy, but he had gotten his various substance abuse problems under control with the help of Joyce, his fiancée. And he was a cameraman, and he sat and he watched the movie in a hotel room with me and Robert Gordon, the producer. And for the first 20 minutes, half an hour, he was really enjoying it, and then it got darker and darker, and I could just hear him going, oh Jerry, to himself. And it ends with a very, very difficult to watch sequence, very, very psychologically violent and physically violent sequence. And he watched it all the way through, and he just said, it's a very, very hard thing to watch yourself that messed up, that drunk, that high on film and see how you treat people, but I'm glad you did it, and it tells the truth, and thank you for making it. And my opinion of him shot up in that moment, because it's kind of a hard thing to watch yourself as, others see you, and he was a very, very messed up man at that point in his life. He was dying, and he knew it, and he was out of control. So, he watched it, and then he went and sat with even more difficulty, knowing what was going to happen. He went and sat and watched it with an audience in Memphis at the sneak preview that we had there that same evening. And amazingly, when he got up at the end, the audience gave him a standing ovation, even though he had behaved like an appalling human being on screen. I think the fact that they could see that he'd sat there and he had witnessed it, and that gave them a good feeling. And the guy had his problems, many problems, but God rest him, he was a real man in some ways, and he had a good heart in some ways. But the film's coming out on DVD in November, along with the CD of Jerry's recordings that were never released while he was alive. So I think people will get a chance to discover it all over again. Then it's been on theatrical release about a year ago, but it kind of came and went quickly. I think it's going to have a longer life on DVD.
Okay. When you're dealing with somebody, or when you're filming somebody who is so vulnerable, because it is a vulnerability, it's violent, but it's still vulnerable.
Yeah.
Is there an added responsibility on you as a director in terms of the choices you make in an edit, or what you allow to happen?
The edit is all about that. Yeah, the edit is. Somebody defined documentary to me recently as being the intersection between art and ethics, and that's exactly what you end up with. You're kind of going, on the one hand we have this extraordinary scene with this incredible dynamic and this emotion and whatever. On the other hand, is it responsible to show this? Is it, was he in his right mind? Are these people, because we had, clearly we had releases from everybody had agreed to be filmed, but your responsibility doesn't end there. And myself and Robert, my producer, Robert is a very experienced documentary producer, and he's from Memphis, so he understands the propensity to treat southern folk as a kind of a cavalcade of freaks and kind of point fingers and all that. And what he called, gawk was what we took out, the kind of stuff where you're looking at the film just to see people screwing up. So we tried our best to take out as much of the gawk factor as we could from the film, but maintain the emotional core of it, which was about, and really try to get people to see what was, the duality of somebody. That, in a similar way to John Healy, you can see more than one side to his personality. You can see that there are very dark sides. You can see that there are very extraordinary sides to him. It's with Jerry McGill. It's maybe it's more about promise that was never delivered, because he was a very talented musician who never did what he should have done with his life. But you can still see the goodness in there somewhere.
Jerry McGill, John Healy, Nathan, Bernard Nathan, which is another person you've made a documentary about. They're all quite maverick, extreme people. Are you consciously drawn to that sort of a subject matter?
I don't know. I don't sort of go out and, I don't know. It would be nice to, like I told you, I tried to do the Jerry McGill film was intentionally in the beginning. I really wanted it to be an uplifting, feel-good, redemptive story of a man who overcame his demons, but it didn't go that way. And with John Healy, I feel the John Healy story is a very redemptive and uplifting story there's a dark side to it, of course. But, I don't know. You just kind of tell the stories you can tell. You just kind of have to, I wish in some ways it would be nice to be extremely, to have a more commercial mindset about things, but in some ways, but maybe that's where I'm headed. But it certainly in the past hasn't always worked out for the things haven't always been that simple.
Okay, and then documentary versus fiction filmmaking, the differences when you're working in each for you.
Oh well, there's no comparison really. It's like that's part of the reason that it's fun to do both, because I'm planning a documentary at the moment, and the part of my brain that's involved in that is completely different to the part of your brain that's involved in script writing or trying to package a drama, trying to put together deals and that. They're like just complementary different parts of the same industry that have nothing in common really, and I couldn't think of anything between the two. I mean, with documentary, it's the reverse of drama, because you're kind of your script writing thing is where it happens in the edit. I mean, really, you create a documentary is created in the edit, whereas in drama, clearly you spend an awful lot of time working on your script and your casting, and then you basically the production is just kind of the logistical working out of the planning that you've already done, with some surprises, but hopefully not too many. In documentary, you're always hoping for surprises. In drama, you're dreading them. So yeah, they're just two. It's fun to do both. I don't know why more people don't.
And when in the 3 documentaries you've done, at any point did you consider doing them as drama stories, or did they always suggest themselves as documentaries to you?
Well, I mean, you couldn't really. I mean, the John Healy thing, I did spend some time working on the notion of trying to make a feature based on his book, The Grass Arena. But after I spent a couple of years on it, and I plowed quite a bit of my own money into it, and it became clear to me that I'd kind of done that story. And in a way, I prefer to have Barbaric Genius be if somebody else makes a film with The Grass Arena, then that's great, but I can't really. I don't think I'd probably be better off not. With Jerry McGill, there have been, interestingly, some approaches made from the American end recently about the idea of whether it would work as a drama. I don't know. I mean, it'd be a crazy idea. I think it'd be fun. I mean, enough time has passed that maybe it could be a story you could tell as a drama. And with Natan, in a way, a drama might be the perfect way to tell the story, because it's a period. It's different to every other documentary I've made. It's much more it's something that happened deep in the past. Everybody involved is dead. It's impossible you can't do the fly on the wall version of it. So, we're actively looking at the possibility of whether there may be a feature drama based on that story that could be doable.
Okay.
But whether it happens or not, who knows?
But one isn't exclusive to the other.
No. I think it's just a question of taste, and whether you have the energy to throw yourself into telling the same story again in a different form. I mean, it's exhausting enough the first time without having to do it again a second time.
So Amber then, which you directed for TV.
No, I didn't. I produced.
Produced it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's fine. Thaddeus Sullivan did a brilliant job of directing. I couldn't have directed it. I was too busy producing it.
So how did you get involved in that?
Rob Cawley and I had been had tried our best to get various things off the ground with RTE in the kind of area of comedy or factual or whatever, and nothing was working. So we eventually, decided we'd try and do some drama, and I was very sceptical about the notion, because I just thought so little drama gets made in Ireland. It's incredibly unlikely that of all the people pitching drama ideas to RTE Drama, that we would be the people they would talk to. But my preconceptions were completely overturned when we went in to sit down with the drama department and found that they were very interested not only in hearing pitches from us, but also in challenging our ideas of what would be acceptable, because we'd just done some low budget web drama stuff for them in the Storyland strand, and I think we first went in with a couple of pitches that were very kind of like what you see on ITV kind of crime series, kind of like a Silent Witness type thing or whatever. Very generic in a way. I mean, it would have been good, but still it wasn't, And they said, we would really like you to challenge yourself, come back with something that would surprise us, come back with something that could potentially be, you know, state of the nation kind of filmmaking that could actually address the entire country, not just, you know, a genre piece that would clearly could be made and sold, could sell very well at MIP and could travel around the world, but isn't actually very specific. We want you to make something really specific to your own experience, to your own lives, and to Ireland. So we literally went out and sat in the canteen in RTE or outside the canteen and started to talk about the idea for Amber, because Rob had the experience of having a missing person in his family about a year previously, and it was still very fresh in our minds, and it was a very, very different situation to Amber. It couldn't have been more different, but the emotional journey and the process that you go through in trying to deal with that was very fresh, and it seemed obvious to us that we could, if they were asking us to do what we thought they were asking us to do, we could present them with something very challenging and different. And we just immediately went, I mean, I remember the visual metaphor that came up straight away was that it would be 4 episodes. The disappearance of Amber is like a rock thrown into a still pool of water at the beginning of episode 1, and then each episode is the ripples as they go further out and affect different people, and affect people initially close to the family, and finally people who've never met Amber, who've never had anything to do with her. And we also said, we discussed how to end it and came to the conclusion that it should be left open and you never find out what happened to her. So we went back with that, pretty much that pitch on, you know, 1 page, 2 pieces of paper. And that was the beginning of developing that.
That was the beginning of that. And you mentioned the ending, which made Joe Duffy.
Yeah, I mean the whole country was throwing shoes at the television.
Were you surprised by that reaction?
I was out of the country for most of the period when I was out of the country for the 2-3 weeks previous to it. I arrived back the day that the last episode aired, so I hadn't been around for the amount of. I hadn't realised quite how much hype and quite how much excitement the show had built up. I'd been watching the Twitter feed and kind of seeing that lots of people were commenting on it and all that, and that was enjoyable. But you know, it was interesting because we conceived it. It was a very cheaply made show, and we conceived of it as something that would probably end up being tucked away on RTE2 at 10 o'clock at night. We didn't really know what was going to happen to it. The fact that it got this kind of viewership was a huge surprise and a huge thrill. And then I think maybe too much might have been made in the publicity about, you know, it being a mystery. It was never a mystery to us. It was more like, it was a drama. It was like, the drama of the story is not what happened to Amber. The drama of the story is how do the people left behind deal with what's happened to them? How do they get on with their lives, and what each of their individual arcs as they try to process the awfulness and move on. So, you know, yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, but it was, you know, it was kind of one of those things. For a couple of days your whole world was sort of a bit rocked. I found it quite entertaining because I've always enjoyed furores. I've never been involved in one before, but I like the idea that a work of, you know, fiction can create this kind of excitement and anger and, you know, chaos in the media, whether it's music or whether it's drama, whether it's whatever, you know. When I was a kid it was the Sex Pistols, or when I was a bit older it was the KLF burning £1 million, and now it's Amber. You know, you kind of, as long as something like that is going on to make people angry, there'll always be something to focus their anger on. It's interesting to be that person for a day or two.
Yes, yeah, and I mean the point is to incite a reaction, good or bad, you know, and you did that.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't intended to incite a reaction. It was intended to a degree, it was intended to incite the reaction of, we've gone on this awful journey and now we are in the position of the people who have lost something. And what's really interesting is there was a perception here in Ireland, which was quite, you know, quite a noisy group of people, about that it was some sort of mistake or some sort of uncompleted story, whereas in actual fact that was the completion of the story. That was the end. If it's not completed in the manner that these people expected, then that's, you know, then they were expecting something different. And I found it interesting to see that people kind of got quite irate about us personally and felt cheated by us personally, whereas the reaction in the United States has been very different. It's been more like people going, you've broken some really serious storytelling rules here, but you've done it to a purpose, and people find that interesting and find it quite challenging, and find it they embrace it, you know. So we kind of, you know, I think it's a national. I think there's to some degree we came a cropper on the national cultural cringe, the feeling that Irish culture will always let you down somewhere along the line, that people will do something though, and people kind of went, oh well, they fucked up. But whereas in actual fact, we did what we were going to do, and if you don't like it, that's okay. But it was exactly what we wanted to do from the beginning. So it's an interesting. I don't know. It's I see it as being a kind of a litmus test of what Irish people want from their home produced culture. They want something a little bit more reassuring. We were making the program during the worst year of the post-recession era, when there were just missing persons posters everywhere, all over. And, every week somebody, a friend of a friend or a relative of a friend would be reported missing or would have committed suicide. The suicide rate in Ireland was through the roof. The series was absolutely suffused deliberately with that awful grief and loss that the country was going through, and the fact that we were losing an entire generation, which has still not been processed. The fact that in the time since then, the emigration from Ireland is far, far worse than it was in the 80s when I was leaving college. It was bad then, and all my friends left. Now it's 10 times worse. And I think maybe in hindsight, in a few years' time, people will look back and realise that Amber walking down the road and disappearing is saying goodbye. That was saying goodbye to a whole generation of possibilities of Ireland for Irish people.
It's funny you say that, because when it aired on BBC, is it A.A. Gill?
Yeah,
Is
he spotted that. I was really surprised by that.
I was surprised too, but it was so.
I never thought A.A. Gill, of all people, would be so sensitive. I mean, people here got it. Declan Lynch and The Independent got it, and there were a few people who got it, but it was extraordinary for an Englishman to be so sensitive to the Irish situation, to actually spot the subtext of that show, and I was pleased by that. Yeah.
There was a quite a long time between you making it and it airing. Mm-hmm. Was that frustrating?
It was horrible. It still is. It's kind of a no. It's like you're a racehorse that's been brought to the paddock and brought to the starting gate, and you're ready to run, and then they just bring you back to the stable. It's not good for you, and it was a couple of years of intense frustration, but in the end, the difference was, I think if it had been broadcast when it was initially commissioned, I don't think the stripping element of showing it 4 nights, one after the other, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, would have occurred. I think it probably would have been shown one a week, and it wouldn't have had the same impact. I think in the interim, RTE became more aware of the value of more stunt scheduling, so to speak, and they tried that out with Amber, and it worked brilliantly for them. I mean, still as a test case, they use it as a test case in terms of how to successfully kind of mobilise social media and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, but the 3 years of waiting was pretty horrendous.
Okay, but it has gone on to be so successful. It's been.
Yeah, it's travelled, and there's currently, I'm not sure what's going to happen. We're not directly involved, but there is, the American remake rights have been optioned, and whether that will actually go ahead or not, it's all on the lap of the gods. But it's interesting to think that they might do it.
Okay, you were named, congratulations, as one of Variety's 10 directors to watch last year.
Yeah.
How did you hear about
that? A writer who had contacted me from Variety, well, not a writer, he's one of the editors of Variety, had been a fan of Extremely Dangerous, and he had been saying, we want to do something about the film and Variety, but it wasn't on theatrical release, and it wasn't on DVD, and it was difficult and all that. So I was walking down Pearse Street or something like that, not in some very unglamorous part of Dublin, and I got a phone call saying, I've decided I think we should put you on the Variety 10 directors to watch list next year. And I kind of, that sounds good, thank you, that's terrific. And he said, I think it has legacy value for you, and that's going to be useful. I mean, Americans use all these phrases with legacy value, I don't know what. Anyway, so I didn't have a clue what that meant, and then I hung up the phone, and I went to the office and I googled it and went, holy shit, that's Darren Aronofsky and Mark Wahlberg and Ben Affleck and all these people had been on this list. And then I started to think, did I hear him right? Maybe he said something different. I'm just misunderstanding, because this isn't, I don't expect to be on this list. So then I had to wait, because I was kind of too embarrassed to call him back and go, can you repeat that? So I waited for a couple of months, and then I kind of sent him a couple of emails going, should I be looking at coming over? And he's like, yeah, definitely come over. It's in January. Come to the... But then I still couldn't get my head around what it was. And eventually they announced it, and I was like, holy crap, yeah. Because the director of one of my favourite films of last year, The Selfish Giant, who's, God, I can't remember her name. God, terrific British... Cleo Bernard was on the list as well, and, really terrific people were on the list. And I went over to the ceremony thing they had in January, and it was great. Met Colin Farrell for the first time since Malika's Angel. So it was interesting.
And when he mentions legacy value, is it significant? Does it help open, or is...
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, geez, you get people ringing you up and stuff and going, "Oh, we saw you on this list and we're really interested." Yeah, I mean, I've got a proper LA agent and manager now, and really, that's the first time in my career I've had all that stuff, and people ringing you up. You get phone calls at 8:30 at night because the time zones are all different, and suddenly you have to be kind of on business hours again, and it's a whole different thing. I'm just not used to it. But that wouldn't have happened with the variety thing, and various other little movements that are happening because of that.
And is America somewhere you see yourself going?
If they'll have me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. We're talking about doing projects in America. Myself and Rob are developing American set drama series. And, I mean, you would want to be crazy not to, because, I mean, we're working in TV drama. Whether you like it or not, the absolute world standard for TV drama at the moment is not anymore in Europe or Britain or Ireland or wherever. It's in the USA. All my favourite, when I was a kid, my favourite TV shows were mostly British, apart from a few American ones like Hill Street Blues or whatever. But the really good stuff was, came out of Britain. It was Alan Bleasdale or Dennis Potter or whatever. Now it's, David Milch and David Simon, and it's even shows like Hannibal, which I think is extraordinary. And, these kind of, the level of adventurousness and the level of experimentation happening in American TV drama, it's inversely proportional to what's going on in movies. Because if you talk to people who are funding movies, unless you've got a big name star attached, you are stuck with, you've got to be doing something in a very, very clearly defined genre with a very, you've got to be sure where your audience is, because people are not taking risks with movies anymore. TV, as long as you can kind of get past the first hurdle, which we seem to have done by having made Amber, they will let you take risks, and they will let you do different things, and they will let you... One of the things that the American TV makers that we've been talking to are most excited by is the fact that Amber is rule breaking, and right now rule breaking is what works. True Detective with its unreliable narrators broke one of the cardinal rules in storytelling, and it worked brilliantly, and you keep seeing that now with new TV shows. It's all about how is it going to turn your experience of watching TV upside down. It's not about watching something comforting and kind of safe. It's about, you're going to be amazed. I'm currently watching Steven Soderbergh's TV show The Nick, which is probably the goriest thing I've seen on television in a long time, and it's completely brilliant. But again, it would never have been made as a movie.
Okay. So producer, writer, director,
editor,
everything.
Storyboard artist. I was a storyboard artist as well.
In all of those things, what would you, if I asked you, what are you, what do you do, how would you identify yourself?
Oh God, I'm a father. I don't know. I don't really know. I desperately try to hang on to the industry, to some level of the industry where I can actually make programs, and whether it's, I mean, when I couldn't make when I didn't get dramas made, I made documentaries. I mean, I'll just make whatever I can, and if I'm let make dramas, I'll make dramas, and if some point in the future I'm not let make dramas anymore, I'll make documentaries again, or I'll keep doing the two concurrently, which would be the best thing. I don't know, it's just about trying to make something. You just want to have a drive to put stories together and put them on camera, tell the story, get it out there. I just like telling stories, and it can't be stopped.
And of the producing, the directing, the writing, is there one that you particularly enjoy doing over the others?
When you're writing, you want to be directing, and when you're directing, you want to be writing, and when you're, producing is never fun. Producing is only fun when you're actually if you've just got a whack of money into your bank account and you're out there trying to actually put together a crew and cast and locations and all that can be fun. But the many, many years of phone calls and emails and bullshit that lead up to that are no fun at all. So the fun part of it is really it's always the next bit you're going to be doing. At the moment, we're just deep in writing, and I'm desperate to get into production. When I'm in production, I'll probably be desperate to get finished in production so we can get into the edit. And when we're in the edit, it'll be all about trying to get back to writing. So it's always like, it's the next thing.
Mm-hmm. And writing, when you're writing, like the practicalities of your day, do you, because I was chatting to somebody recently who's a writer, and she's doing this job and that job, and she says it's not really possible to write in a 2-hour space in your day. Do you try and dedicate it?
It depends. I mean, I wrote my first. I mean, it took me a long time to start to believe that I could actually be a writer. It was the last thing. I'd done everything else before I ended up deciding I could actually call myself a writer. And the first script I wrote by myself, basically, I just got up very early every morning before anybody else was around, so I could get a few hours work done at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, and usually get 2 or 3 hours under my belt before there was a phone call or anybody around, and that worked brilliantly. And since then, I haven't really returned to that. But I think for the most part, when you're writing, you're kind of trying to make sure that you're not waiting for inspiration, because that's the worst thing you can do. You try to get up, write as many words as you can, and then if you end up erasing 2/3 of them, it's okay. You've done it. It's. I think every script feels different. Depending, it has different rhythm, and one of the trickiest things, and one of the things that we're discovering, that we're finding out how to do all the time, is co-writing, because myself and Rob co-write, and it's always it's a tricky chemistry to get right. I mean, people. It makes being in a relationship or a marriage look relatively straightforward and simple. It's complicated. So yeah.
Funding has come up a lot in conversation. Are there introductions you'd like to see made, or changes to the current, in terms of enabling Irish filmmakers?
The only thing that comes to the mind off the top of my head is RTE need to be making feature-length documentaries. They need to be putting money into docs that are not part of a series or not part of a docu-soap. They need to be actually funding, because some of the most successful films to be made in Ireland the last few years have been Knuckle, The Summit, His and Hers. These are not flukes. These are films made by really skilled filmmakers for an Irish audience that really appreciates feature documentary making. And RTE Television does not have a dedicated slot for feature documentaries. Every so often you get one through. The Summit was on last year. I produced Kieran Scott's film In a House That Ceased to Be, which is premiering next week, and that's going to be on RTE sometime in the next foreseeable future, and they're showing it at the full uncut length, which is great, because they're not, a lot of the time when you make a feature documentary, you're told the TV broadcast of it will be 52 minutes, and that's what happened to Barbaric Genius. It was put out at a truncated length. I really feel that it would be a huge step in the right direction if RTE had a Storyville type strand where they made feature documentaries the centre of their schedule. Similarly, I think it would be very useful if RTE committed to making feature films, feature-length dramas on a regular basis, however many a year. It's a difficult thing. It's a constant conversation between Film Board and RTE, and they haven't come to an agreement on it. It seems to me like it's a huge missing element from our national culture, is that there isn't a committed interest from the broadcaster in funding features. We still get through. People still fund their films one way or the other. I mean, Brendan Muldowney has just funded his next film. It's going to be, I think, UTV or the broadcaster. There'll always be a way of getting them made, but it's difficult. And I think that kind of joined up thinking has always been very lacking in Irish culture. But for the most part, I mean, I'm a big fan of what James Hickey and Jane Gogan are doing with their respective portfolios, and they're doing a lot of good and great work and getting. I mean, look at what's happening with Irish film now. We've had 3 or 4 huge breakout successes in the last couple of years, maybe more than that. But it should have happened 15, 16, 17 years ago. That's what I'm saying. But now it's finally happening. I hope there's still a film industry there in a few years that we can continue to do this. But it's, it's tricky.
Okay. What are your strengths in what you do? You know, what makes you good at what you do?
Utter inability to take no for an answer. Just sheer stupidity, boneheaded stubbornness, and never ever admitting that that's it, it's over, we can't do it. That's been terrible sometimes because you keep flogging a dead horse. But you know, sometimes, the films I've made, they would not have been made if I'd agreed that, with everybody else at the time. So you go through a period where everybody's telling you you're insane, but then you come out the other end and the film's finished, and people stop telling you you're insane, hopefully.
Your biggest influence?
I don't know what my biggest influences are. I have no clue. It's a really hard question to answer. I like lots of movies. I watch lots of films. I watch thousands and thousands of films. I like Martin Scorsese and Orson Welles and Werner Herzog and Earl Morris and Les Blanc and Wes Anderson and I could list a million, but then I don't know if any of them. I think if anybody looked at my films and said, I'll tell you what, actually, the biggest influence I've had is a filmmaker, an Irish filmmaker you probably nobody here has ever heard of, called Leo Regan. Leo Regan, who is an Irish documentary filmmaker who works in the UK and made some of the best documentaries I've ever seen. Myself and Ross Whitaker are the only two people. We get together and we talk about Leo Regan films at great length. It gave me the freedoms. Watching his films, which are not conventionally beautifully made, they are very rough and ready and very handheld and very gonzo, gave me the courage to make the films I was making, because I can't make those beautifully framed Werner Herzog, John T. Davis, whatever kind of films shot on 16mm with a light meter and tripod. I'm just out there on my own with a handheld camera. Leo Regan made some of the best documentaries ever to be made in this country, and his name is completely unknown within Ireland. I keep trying to get people to do a retrospective of his work here. He was a massive influence on me on a very practical level, in that it showed that you don't have to be... I'd never studied documentary, I'd never studied camera work, I'd never studied editing, I'd never studied any of the things I did, but I ended up just doing them all myself. And he kind of, I was well into making Barbaric Genius before I actually met him and got a chance to tell him what a great influence he'd been. But, apart from that, I can't think of any really practical influences I've had. A good one is, years ago I was being taught in Dunleary by Owen Harris, who taught screenwriting there, and I had about a year of Owen's lectures, and he was probably the first and last person to ever tell me anything useful about screenwriting. Ever since then, everything else I've been picking up has been kind of embellishing what he already told me. So Owen was a massive influence on the dramatic end of how I think, how I structure drama and all that, and in documentary, Leo Regan.
The best and worst advice you've ever received?
Jesus, these are hard questions. I don't know.
We write them and then
I don't know if I've ever listened to anybody's advice. Did I ever listen to? Gaspar Noé has a great line about advice. He says, "I love advice. Advice is great as long as you don't take it." And I think that's kind of good. Sometimes people give you advice and it can be useful at the time, but I can't remember anybody ever telling me anything that really. Yeah, I don't know. The worst advice? Jeez, I've had so much bad advice in my life, and I've listened to most of it. I don't know.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh man. It's somewhere I'd be tempted to say give up, and on the other hand, I'd say move to New York. I probably would say, if I could, I would say get the hell out of Dublin, go to New York, and but don't take drugs in New York. Just stay away from the crazy people. Just go and get a camera and start making films. Because it was. I look back now and I think of all the crazy and mad stuff that was happening all around the world when I came out of college, and I missed it all because I was in Dublin. And nothing was happening in Dublin in that era. So, I'd go get the hell out of Ireland quicker.
And would you say that now to a 20-year-old?
I don't know. I think now it's different because you can't go to New York. You can, but you'll end up in Queens or, Flatbush or somewhere like that where you can afford a flat. Same thing in London. You move to London, you can't afford to live in London. You end up living in Enfield. The years during which I was very lucky to be around for and to have enough money to survive in London in a period where I could actually live in the middle of London. I lived in Soho, right in the middle of all the madness, and I could never afford to do that now. And certainly, if I moved to New York, I could never afford to live anywhere even halfway cool or interesting. The artists and the people who make art and the people who are experimental and people who have ideas are now too poor to live close to each other in the middle of cities. The kind of artistic renaissance as you saw in the 70s and early 80s in New York and London can't happen anymore because all these people are threaded out around the fringes in cheap accommodation, out around the outer networks of the outer boroughs, and they don't meet each other anymore. So I don't know. I think those kinds of meetings of minds and those kinds of inspirations now happen on the internet. People now meet each other and find each other wherever they are in the world. You can be collaborating with a filmmaker in Sao Paulo in Brazil or a filmmaker in Reykjavik, and never, you might already have developed your idea before you meet. The manner in which things work has changed completely because of the economics of it. So I don't know what advice I'd give a 20-year-old now. I certainly don't think I'd say go to New York. I think they'd be crazy. I think Patti Smith said recently, artists don't come to New York. It's over. It's closed. It's finished. Go somewhere else. So maybe there is a place. Maybe there's another part of the world where people can go, Winnipeg or I don't know, somewhere where they can make art, but it's not New York.
So you've explained the frustrations, but what do you love about what you do? Or why do you do what you do?
It's a good feeling to make something that you feel proud of and is different and is new and actually makes people feel something. It's it's the same thing as a novelist or a painter or a songwriter feels. You create something that wasn't there, you put it out there, and people will either respond to it or they don't. If they don't respond to it, fine. If they do respond to it, that's a good feeling. When people come to you and go, your film, or that thing that you made was moving or had a resonance with me, or it's a nice thing to feel. But I think actually, to be perfectly honest, it's not. I don't really care that much about that. I care more about the feeling of actually making it, and the process of making films to me is a very rewarding one. Not financially, clearly, but very rewarding creatively and very rewarding enriches your life, and for me anyway, it's a way that it's the only way I've ever I haven't found anything else, any other way to live that delivers the same richness of experience, and meeting interesting people, meeting extraordinary people, and it's fun.
Paul Duane, thank you very much.
Thank you.